In the previous video, I gave a general overview of the STP stack and the bridge we built between Karatani and Marx. Now I'd like to continue this by introducing Alexander Bogdanov to the picture. As I said previously, we conceived of the social world as one particular solution in the larger space of possible forms of organization. And I will try to define this more concretely in a moment. But first, I want to talk about why the left should care about Bogdanov in the first place. Bogdanov wanted to unify all the sciences under a single science of organization, which is ridiculously ambitious. It's also not directly politically relevant, at least not at first glance. Nor is it something that we in STP are equipped to fulfill. However, in his attempt to do this, Bogdanov gives us some useful tools that we can use towards the problems of political effectiveness, towards ecology, social reproduction, and the role of ideology. This is a challenge because these problems seem to relate to different scales of analysis and different scientific objects. For example, the climate is different from the individual's myth-making, which is different from laws and institutions. Because Bogdanov is a cross-disciplinary figure to the utmost degree, it becomes a perfect match for transferring methods of one scientific discipline to another. Techtology, which is Bogdanov's name for general science of organizations, is all about studying the common constraints that exist on organizations. What allows smaller orgs to link up to form bigger ones, and what makes organizations succeed or fail over time. His definition of organization is really simple. When you bring multiple things together, if the end result is more than the sum of its parts, you have an organized system. Otherwise, it's neutral or disorganized. Another axiom is that there is no totally disorganized system. When trying to adapt techtology to our needs, we found that we needed a narrower conception of social phenomena than the one that Bogdanov provided in order to connect the important bits of Karatani and Marx that I mentioned in the last video. We managed to do this while researching the connection between world systems theory and real abstraction. What we came up with was a concept of social world that includes both the modes of exchange and the material basis that sustains these modes. Again, these are very general questions, so let's try to make them a little more concrete. In the STP framework, capitalism does not just consist of the world of commodity exchange, but it also consists of all the big and little mechanisms that sustain or propagate capitalist logic over time. In STP, we started calling these mechanisms social atoms based on Badiou's theory of real atoms that he outlines in Logics of Worlds. Most importantly, even though these atoms sustain capitalism, they don't necessarily come from the market, but they can also come from other modes, like A, which is again kinship logic, and B, property logic, or we might call it contractual logic. Each social atom is made up of a logical fragment that it carries or propagates, as well as a material basis which consists of its own logic that is more or less independent from what it carries. For example, the logic of a family might be very different from that of the market. We don't try to extract profit from our family members when we cook for them, for example, but that doesn't mean that families don't also propagate capitalism by producing and stabilizing the labor force. Or the legal system, which is not generally a profit-making institution, but can be utilized by corporations to enforce rent extraction and intellectual property rights. To take a big picture example, the ISDS, or the Investor-State Dispute Settlement Process, allows corporations to sue governments. This is an international mechanism for ensuring that profits are not threatened by domestic attempts at regulation. So the legal system of a given nation, which expresses its sovereignty, has its own logic, but this is irrelevant from the standpoint of global capital, which uses nation-states as a vehicle for its self-expansion. We can see that most social phenomena are in fact a hybrid of multiple logics, and it's important that we understand these kinds of asymmetrical relationships and how they evolved over time. The fact that one logic can propagate another without the latter having any access to the context of the former is STP's basic definition of materialism. Certain logics conduct other logics better than others, and so we can think of capitalism as a set of constraints which not only are propagated by these social atoms, but they also select those logics which most adequately propagate itself, the logic of profit over time. So for more on this, please watch our lecture series on environmental logic. So now that we have STP's version of a materialist definition of capitalism and social worlds, what can we do with that? Well, it means we need to study how these various mechanisms or social atoms work both against us and for us. Our social reproduction, our survival as humans, depends on the same things that also propagate capitalist logic, right? Kinship, legal institutions, and so on. This is why that quote about the end of the world being more conceivable than the end of capitalism rings true. But the reason for this indiscernibility is that we don't have political experiments strong enough yet to discern the difference between our world, the world that matters to us, and the capitalist one. This is a central challenge for example, abolitionist politics, which attempts to dismantle certain mechanisms. For example, how do we demonstrate that we can live without the police or without prisons and so on? And these demonstrations can be viewed as further perturbations of a system that claims that we need these mechanisms. This leads us to a very important conclusion, that the social world is not the endpoint, but the raw material for political investigation. How social mechanisms work and the way they interrelate are generally hidden. And as we briefly covered in the previous video, one sign of a successful political experiment is that it perturbs or disrupts a given set of mechanisms so that they become visible. But disruption is only one step in the process. You also need to be able to add the information that you gain from disruption to your model of the world. We call any organization that can both disrupt a social world and also absorb the information that is produced from that disruption a political organization. This is to be opposed to social organizations that simply view those disruptions as noise, right? There's nothing useful for social organizations. All the traditional categories of leftist militancy can be recast in light of this definition. And we don't claim any novelty here. This is already woven into the history of earlier movements. At one point, it was called scientific socialism, and Bogdanov is certainly of that tradition, since he saw Marx's formulation of class struggle as a precursor to technology. We in STP have spent the last few years trying to borrow various organizational tools to see if we can build such an extensible and flexible model that can suit the needs of politically engaged groups. In this direction, we've been attracted to the work of, for example, applied category theorists and the way that they exploit the notion of composition. Namely, any structured thing can be viewed as made of other similarly structured things. And category theory is a general mathematical framework that keeps track of this process. In this framework, what makes two things the same is not their inner content, but their compositional characteristics. To us, this sounds very much like techtology, and we've made some inroads into formalizing the insights of the four thinkers in the STP stack using category theory. For example, for more examples on this, see our videos on the primer or on memory evolutive systems. Anyway, this is a really abbreviated glimpse into our research into organizations and social worlds. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact us via the comment section or through the website. Thank you for watching.